He thought the year would break me. He thought I would come to him in month 10, or month 11, or on the last grey morning of our contract, and ask, quietly, the way women of my station were expected to ask, if I might be permitted to stay. He had miscalculated in a way that only a man who has never been refused can miscalculate. Because I had been counting down since the morning we wed. Not counting up, the way a hopeful bride might. Counting down. And on the morning of day 364, I walked into his study with the ring in one palm and a small brass key in the other. And I laid them both on his desk before he had finished his coffee. What he did in the 24 hours that followed is the whole of this story. But to understand those hours, you must understand the 363 days that preceded them, and the morning, nearly a year before that, when the Duke of Ashford came to my father's drawing room with a contract and a proposition that he believed no woman in my position could refuse. He was wrong about that too. I could have refused him. I simply chose not to. My name is Clara Whitmore, and in the spring of my 23rd year, my father's shipping concerns failed in a manner that was both unremarkable and catastrophic. Unremarkable because half the small merchant houses in Bristol failed that season. Catastrophic because we had borrowed against the house, and the house against the warehouses, and the warehouses against a future that no longer existed. I was the eldest of 4. My brother Thomas was 15 and at school, which we could no longer afford. My sisters Louisa and Beatrice were 12 and 9, and had not yet been told that their governess would be leaving at the end of the quarter. My mother knew. My father knew. I knew. The servants knew, because servants always know first. I was in the morning room attempting to compose a letter to my aunt in Norfolk, a letter I had already drafted 4 times and could not bring myself to send, when our butler announced the Duke of Ashford. I had never met him. I knew of him the way one knows of distant weather. He was 31, unmarried, reputedly cold, reputedly rich, and reputedly in possession of an estate in Hampshire that had once belonged to a queen. He had no reason to be in our drawing room. He had no reason to know our name. My father received him alone for half an hour. Then my father sent for me. The Duke did not stand when I entered, which I noted. He was tall, even-seated, dark-haired, clean-shaven, with the kind of face that looked as though it had been carved rather than grown. His eyes were a pale grey that made the rest of him seem warmer by comparison, which was not saying much. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "sit down, please. Your father and I have been discussing a matter that concerns you directly. I would prefer to speak to you plainly, if you will permit it." I sat. My father would not meet my eyes. "I require a wife," the Duke said, "for reasons that are my own. The marriage will last 1 year. At the end of that year, we will separate by mutual declaration. You will retain a settlement sufficient to secure your family's circumstances in perpetuity, and you will be free to do as you wish with the remainder of your life. I am offering you the settlement now. I am offering you the marriage as the condition of receiving it." I waited. I had learned, in the weeks since my father's ruin, that silence extracts information more reliably than any question. "I do not require affection," he said. "I do not require heirs. I require a wife in residence, a wife in name, and a wife whose conduct will not embarrass the title during the period in question. That is the whole of it." "Why 1 year?" I asked. He considered me for a long moment. "Because the terms of a family trust require that I marry before my 32nd birthday. My birthday falls in 3 weeks. The trust releases its principal to me 1 year after my marriage is recorded. upon which date the marriage may be dissolved without further cost to me. The sum involved is substantial. A portion of it, a generous portion, I am prepared to give to you. And if I refuse? Then I will find someone else. There are a great many young women in circumstances similar to yours, Miss Whitmore. You are, if you will forgive me, not irreplaceable. You are, however, convenient. Your father's situation is known. Your discretion, I am told, is reliable. I would prefer to have this matter concluded by the end of the month. I looked at my father, who was studying the pattern of the carpet. I will give you my answer tomorrow, I said. You will give it to me in the next hour, the Duke replied. Or I will find another carpet to stand on. I have 3 other names on my list. He was, I decided in that moment, the most genuinely unpleasant man I had ever met. He was also, by any mathematical accounting, my family's only remaining hope. My aunt in Norfolk would not answer my letter. My mother's jewellery would not cover the interest on the warehouse notes. My sisters would be sent, one by one, to positions as companions and governesses, and my brother would go to sea. 1 year, I said. Precisely 1 year. Not a day more. And the settlement is signed and lodged with my father's solicitor before I stand at the altar. Agreed. And one further condition. He raised an eyebrow. I will count the days, I said. I will count them visibly, and I will count them openly. And on the 365th morning, I will walk out of your house without ceremony and without farewell. I want you to know, from the first hour, that I am not your wife. I am your tenant. I am paying rent in a currency you have specified. When the lease expires, I will leave. He looked at me then, really looked, for perhaps the first time since I had entered the room. And I saw something cross his face that I could not name. It was gone before I could examine it. Agreed, he said. We were married 17 days later in a chapel on his Hampshire estate, with his grandmother and 3 servants as witnesses. His grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Ashford, was 78 years old, half blind and, I would later learn, the only person in the world the Duke truly feared. After the vows, she pressed a small brass key into my hand. It was old, the teeth worn smooth, the bow shaped into a curl of ivy. This belongs to the house, she said. Wear it. A wife should carry a key. I looked at the Duke. He gave the faintest shake of his head. Not refusal, but resignation. It is a loan, he said quietly, until the year is out. I threaded it onto a black silk ribbon that same afternoon and wore it against my collarbone. I did not take it off, not once, in the 363 days that followed. And now I must tell you about the counting. In my dressing room at Ashford, in the top drawer of a small walnut writing desk that had belonged to the Duke's mother, I kept a leather-bound book. It was not a diary. It was a ledger. Each morning, before I went down to breakfast, I drew a single vertical line on the page for the day. At the end of each week, I struck a diagonal through the 7 lines. At the end of each month, I wrote the number of days remaining at the bottom of the page. 365, 364, 363. I never hid the ledger. If a maid opened the drawer to dust, she would see it. If the Duke entered my dressing room, which he did not in those first months, he would see it. I wanted him to see it. I had told him I would count, and I was counting. The first time he noticed, we had been married for 41 days. We had taken to breakfasting together, not out of affection, but out of a shared preference for the morning hour and a shared unwillingness to eat alone in a house with 32 rooms. He read the papers. I read correspondence from my mother, who wrote every third day with careful, grateful news. Thomas had returned to school. Louisa was being fitted for new gowns. The warehouse at the quay had been cleared and leased to a respectable tenant. The settlement was, by every measure, doing what it had been promised to do. On the 41st morning, the Duke set down his paper and said, "You were in the blue drawing room yesterday afternoon, with a book." I was. The book had numbers in the margins. My housekeeper mentioned it. I record the date each time I open a new volume. It is a habit. That is not what Mrs. Pembridge described. I set down my teacup. "Would you like to see the ledger, Your Grace?" "No," he said after a pause. "I would like to know whether you intend to keep it on public display." "It is not on display. It is in my dressing room. It is in a drawer. I'm not flaunting it. I'm simply not hiding it." I met his eyes. "You knew the terms. You agreed to them. I'm not going to pretend to be something I am not in order to make the arrangement more comfortable for you." He was silent for a long moment. "What is the number this morning?" he asked. 324. He nodded once, picked up his paper, and did not speak to me again that day. The first 3 months of our marriage were, I think, the easiest of the year. We established a rhythm the way prisoners and their guards establish a rhythm. He rode out after breakfast and returned for dinner. I managed the house, which his housekeeper had been running perfectly well for 20 years, and which required nothing of me beyond my visible presence. I rode in the afternoons, I read in the evenings, I wrote to my mother. I did not ask the Duke about his business, and he did not ask me about mine. The Dowager Duchess, who lived in the East Wing, sent for me on Tuesdays and Fridays. She was sharp-tongued, vividly intelligent, and entirely unfooled by our arrangement. She had extracted the essential facts from her grandson within a week of our arrival, and she regarded me, from that point forward, with a combination of pity and strategic interest that I found I did not mind. "He lost her 11 years ago," she told me on my first Tuesday visit, without preamble. "Catherine Morley, the vicar's daughter in the next parish. They were to be married in the spring. She died in the February of a fever. He was 20. He has not permitted himself an attachment since. Do not mistake his coldness for cruelty. He is terrified of his own grief, and he has been terrified for a very long time. That is not my concern, madam." "No," she said, "it is not. But you should know what you are living with nonetheless." I thought about it often in the weeks that followed. I did not think about it with sympathy, precisely. I thought about it with the detachment of a woman studying a lock she had no intention of opening. He had his grief. I had my ledger. We were not here to repair one another. The first change came in the 4th month. There was a storm in early autumn, the kind that comes off the Channel and pins Hampshire beneath it for 3 days running. The roads flooded. The village at the bottom of the estate lost its bridge. The Duke, who had been in London on business, could not return. I was in the library on the second night of the storm when a footman came to tell me that a family from the village had walked up to the house. A mother, 2 children, and a grandfather, because their cottage had been overtaken by the river and they had nowhere to go. The housekeeper had put them in the servants' hall. She wanted to know whether I approved. I went down. I saw the children. The younger one, a girl of perhaps 6, was soaked through and shivering. I saw the grandfather, who had a gash across his forehead that no one had yet cleaned. I saw the mother, who was trying very hard not to weep in front of her children. I did not wait for the Duke's return to make a decision. I had 3 guest rooms opened. I had hot baths drawn. I sent a footman with a dog cart to 3 other cottages I knew sat on the low ground nearest the river. And by morning, we had 14 villagers in the house, 11 in the attics, 3 in the sick room, because the grandfather's gash had become infected, and the village physician could not cross the bridge. I did not sleep for 2 days. I wrote letters to the tenant farmers on higher ground, asking for dry bedding and food. I wrote to the steward asking for the contents of the storeroom to be inventoried and distributed. I sat with the grandfather through the second night, while the physician, who had finally reached us by boat, drained and dressed the wound. The Duke returned on the 4th day, by which point the waters had receded and most of the villagers had gone home. 3 remained: the grandfather, still too weak to travel, and the family whose cottage had been destroyed entirely. He came into the drawing room where I was sitting with the mother, going over the accounts of what had been used from the storerooms. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the woman. He looked at me. He looked at the ledger on the table, which was not my ledger, but the household one. And he said nothing for a long moment. "Mrs. Hale," he said finally to the woman, "I am sorry for your loss. We will have your cottage rebuilt before winter. In the meantime, you and your children will remain as guests in this house. The Duchess will see to whatever you require." He met my eyes when he said, "the Duchess." It was the first time he had called me that in his own voice, rather than in the formal language of introductions. That night at dinner, he said, "You acted without consulting me. There was no time to consult you. The bridge was down. I am not reprimanding you, Clara. I am observing it." It was the first time he had used my given name. I noted it, the way I noted everything, and I said nothing. "What is the number?" he asked after a pause. 261. He nodded. He did not speak again until the plates were cleared. But this is where things begin to change, and I want you to mark the shift. Because the story I am telling you is not the story of a woman who slowly softens toward a difficult man. It is the story of a man who slowly realizes he has built his year on a foundation he did not understand, and a woman who watches that realization without altering her course by a single degree. The Duke began to appear in rooms where I was. He began to ask questions at dinner, about the village, about my sisters, about the books I was reading. He began to ride with me in the afternoons, though he never suggested it. He simply appeared at the stables at the hour I rode, and turned his horse toward whatever direction I chose. I permitted it. I did not encourage it. I continued to count. In the 7th month, he asked me to ride to the far edge of the estate with him, to see a cottage he was considering giving to a retiring gamekeeper. We rode out in the morning and did not return until dusk. We spoke, not about anything of consequence, but the way 2 people speak who have begun, despite themselves, to enjoy each other's company. At the gate of the stable yard, as I dismounted, he said, "What is the number today?" 172. He nodded. He did not smile, but something in his face had tightened, and I saw it, and I pretended I had not. And now I must tell you about Lady Helena Carow, who entered our lives in the 8th month and nearly destroyed us both. She arrived in a carriage with the Ashford crest on the door, which she had no right to, because she was not an Ashford. She was the widowed cousin of the Duke's late mother, a woman of 34 with a reputation for calculated cruelty that had preceded her by several counties. She had been, briefly, the Duke's closest companion in the years after Catherine Morley's death. She had expected, at one point, to marry him. She had not been invited. She presented herself at the front door with 3 trunks and the announcement that she had come to visit her dear cousin for the season. The Duke was in London. The Dowager Duchess, who loathed her, was confined to bed with a bronchial complaint and could not eject her. The housekeeper looked at me with the expression of a woman who has been handed a live coal and asked what to do with it. I put her in the yellow suite on the 2nd floor, which was the furthest suite from my own rooms, and I sent a letter to the Duke by the fastest rider we had. He did not come back. His reply, which arrived 2 days later, said only, "She will be gone by the week's end. Do not engage with her beyond courtesy." It was not enough. Lady Helena understood, within 6 hours of her arrival, the exact nature of our marriage. I do not know how. She was the kind of woman who could read a room the way other people read a newspaper. And she had known the Duke since he was a boy. She understood that I was there on a contract. She understood the contract was nearly 2/3 expired. And she understood, or believed she understood, that she had a window in which to act. She was charming at breakfast. She was solicitous at dinner. She asked me over tea on the 2nd afternoon whether I had met Catherine Morley's sister, who still lived in the next village and who, Helena said, had been such a comfort to dear Edmund in the difficult years. I said I had not had the pleasure. She said it was a pity, because the sister was so like Catherine had been, and dear Edmund had always said, well, she would not gossip. But she did wonder, she said, whether I had ever considered what would happen to me when the year was out, whether my family had made provisions, whether I had somewhere to go. I looked at her over the rim of my cup. I have an arrangement with my husband, Lady Helena. The particulars are not your concern. Of course not, she said, smiling. I meant only that I hope you have considered your position. Edmund has a way of, how shall I say, losing interest very suddenly. It would be a shame to be surprised. I did not respond. That night I wrote to the Duke again. I did not ask him to return. I told him, plainly, what Lady Helena had said. I told him I did not believe her, but I told him also that I believed she intended some harm, and that he would be well advised to attend to the matter personally, rather than through letters. He arrived the following afternoon. Now, and I want you to pay very close attention here, because this is the hinge of the entire story. Lady Helena did not come to Ashford by accident. She had been, for the better part of a year, in correspondence with a solicitor in London named Mr. Graves. Mr. Graves was a man who made his living by identifying the weaknesses in family trusts, and he had identified in the Ashford Trust a clause that the Duke had either forgotten or had never fully understood. The clause stated that if the marriage were terminated within the first year by the wife's demonstrable infidelity or her abandonment of the household, the settlement to the wife would be forfeit and the principal would revert not to the Duke, but to the next living collateral heir. The next living collateral heir was Lady Helena Carrow's younger brother, a man named Edgar Fitzroy, who owed Lady Helena a great deal of money. She had come to Ashford, in other words, not to court the Duke. She had come to engineer a situation, a public scandal, an apparent infidelity, a staged abandonment, that would void my settlement and transfer the entire trust to her brother, from whom she would then recover her debt and a substantial commission besides. I did not know this on the afternoon the Duke returned. I knew only that something was wrong. He rode in at 3 o'clock. He went directly to the yellow suite. I heard his voice, low and controlled, and hers, rising. I heard a door close. I heard him walk the length of the corridor and down the main stair, and when he came into the drawing room where I was sitting, his face was the colour of old iron. "She leaves in the morning," he said. "I have said what needed to be said. I apologize that you were made to entertain her alone." "Thank you." He sat down across from me. He looked at the fire for a long while. "What is the number today?" he asked. 119. He closed his eyes briefly. Then he opened them and looked at me. And for the first time since I had married him, I saw him without any of his customary defenses. "Clara," he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. If I asked you, today, whether you would consider amending our arrangement, extending it or dissolving the terms of it, what would you say?" I thought for a long moment. "I would say that you agreed to a year," I said, "and I would say that I have spent 3/4 of that year being counted down, not counted on. And I would say that whatever you feel, or think you feel, has arrived too late to be trusted." That is a fair answer. It is the only one I have. He nodded. He did not ask again. Lady Helena left the following morning. I did not see her go. The Duke saw her to her carriage himself, and I later learned, from the housekeeper, who had it from the footman, that he had spoken to her for precisely 4 minutes at the door, and had then closed the carriage and walked back into the house without looking back. But she did not, as it turned out, leave us alone. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at the house addressed to me. It was written in an unfamiliar hand, on expensive paper, and it was signed, "A Friend." It told me, in careful and specific detail, that my husband had been seen in London, at a house in Half Moon Street, in the company of Lady Helena Carow. It told me the date, a date on which I knew the Duke had been in London because he had written to me from his club that evening. It told me the hour and the duration of his visit, and it concluded with the observation that I would be wise to consider my position before the year expired. I read it twice. I folded it. I put it in the drawer of my writing desk, beneath the ledger. That evening at dinner, I handed it to the Duke without speaking. He read it. His face did not change, but his hand, on the stem of his wineglass, went very still. "This is a lie," he said. "I believe you." He looked up sharply. "Do you?" "I do. You were at your club on the date in question. You wrote to me from it. The letter is in my desk upstairs. Whoever sent this did not know that." "Clara." "However," I said, "whoever sent this wanted me to believe it. And I am asking you, now, who stands to gain by making me believe my husband has been unfaithful in the last months of our arrangement?" He put down his wine. He put his hands flat on the table. And he told me, in the clear, unhurried voice of a man who has been holding a secret he no longer has the energy to hold, everything he had learned about Lady Helena Carow, her brother, Mr. Graves, and the clause in the Ashford Trust. He had known for a week. He had been trying to decide how to tell me. "She is trying to manufacture a scandal," he said. "She wants witnesses. She wants something on paper. If you leave before the year is out, for any reason that can be construed as abandonment, the settlement is void, and your family loses everything. And if I do not leave? Then the year expires, the marriage dissolves by our own terms, and the settlement stands." I looked at him. "And you?" "And I receive the principal of the trust, which I had intended, which I have always intended, to use for the improvement of the estate." "That is what you intended at the beginning?" "Yes." "And now?" He was silent. "What is the number today, Clara?" he asked. 96. 96 days, he said. I am asking you to be careful for 96 days. I am asking you to trust me for 96 days. I know what I am asking. I know what I have not earned the right to ask. I will be careful, I said. I will be careful because my sister's futures depend on it, not because you have asked. He nodded. He did not look wounded. He looked, for the first time in our acquaintance, like a man who had understood something. The next 83 days were the strangest of the year. Lady Helena's campaign continued. Letters arrived, to me, to neighbours, to the vicar's wife, each one suggesting some impropriety, each one designed to accumulate into a picture of a marriage in public collapse. A woman from the village reported that a stranger had approached her at the market, offering coin in exchange for any unusual observations about the goings-on at Ashford. A groom was offered £5 to say he had seen the Duchess leave the house at night. He refused and reported it. The Duke and I did not alter our routine. We rode in the afternoons, we breakfasted together, we dined together. I continued to count. He continued to ask, each evening, what the number was. But something had shifted. He had told me the truth, and in telling me the truth, he had made himself, for the first time in 363 days, a person I could see clearly. And a person I could see clearly is a person I could choose to leave, deliberately and on my own terms, rather than a person I was simply counting down from. On day 20 before the end, I began to prepare. I wrote to my mother. I told her I would be returning home. I arranged for a carriage. I packed my trunks, not secretly, but openly, the way a tenant packs when a lease is ending. I wrote letters of thanks to the housekeeper, to the steward, to the Dowager Duchess. The Duke saw the trunks. He did not comment. On day 10, he said, at dinner, I would like you to consider staying past the year's expiration, as a guest, for as long as you wish. No, I said. I understand. I do not think you do, but I thank you for the offer. On day 5, he said, I am drafting a letter to your mother. I would like her to know that the settlement will be paid in full, and that I have arranged a supplementary annuity for your sisters, which will remain in force regardless of any future arrangements you or I may enter into. That is very generous. It is what I can do. On day 2, he did not speak at all. On the morning of day 364, I walked into his study at the hour when he took his coffee. I had the ring in one palm. I had the brass key in the other. The black silk ribbon, frayed from a year's wear, lay coiled beside it. He looked up. He set down his cup. Today is 364, I said. I am returning these a day early because I want the last day to be mine, and not the marriage's. The carriage will come at noon tomorrow. I will be gone by 1. I laid them on the desk, the ring, the key, the ribbon. He looked at them for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were not cold. They were not even grey. They were the colour of a morning I had not seen before in his face. May I have the day, he said. May I have the 24 hours? For what? To say what I should have said in the first month. In my own time, in my own way, without expecting an answer. I am not asking you to stay, Clara. I am asking you for one day in which I am permitted to speak, without the least counting against me. I considered it. One day, I said, and then the carriage, and then the carriage. What he did in the next 24 hours is the whole of this story, and I will tell it to you now, because I promised you I would. He did not ask me to stay. He did not court me. He did not plead. He did not produce some dramatic gesture calculated to overwhelm a year of accumulated distance. He had learned, somewhere in the last 96 days, that the woman he had married could not be overwhelmed, and that the woman he had married could not be bought, and that the woman he had married had told him the truth at the beginning. She was a tenant, and the lease was expiring, and no amount of flowers or jewelry or last-minute declarations would alter the terms of a contract she had entered into with her eyes open. Instead, he did 3 things. First, he took me, in the early afternoon, to the small stone cottage at the far edge of the estate. The one we had ridden to in the 7th month, the one he had been considering for the retiring gamekeeper. He had not given it to the gamekeeper. He had spent the intervening months having it restored. He opened the door and handed me the deed. "This is yours," he said. "Not as a condition of anything, not as a bribe. It is yours because in the 4th month, when the village flooded, you did not wait for me. You acted as though the people on this land were your responsibility, and they were not. And you did it anyway. I owe you a piece of the land that you protected. It is in your name. It cannot be taken back." Second, in the late afternoon he took me to his grandmother. The Dowager Duchess was sitting by her window in the east wing, wrapped in the paisley shawl she had worn every day of my acquaintance with her. She looked at me. She looked at the Duke. She looked at my empty throat, where the brass key had hung for 364 days. "You returned it," she said. "I returned it." "Good girl." She held out her hand. The Duke placed the key in her palm. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she looked at me again, and she said, "Come here, child." I went to her. She took the key and the ribbon, and she tied it, her old fingers clumsy but precise, around my neck again. "This is mine," she said. "Not his, not the estate's. Mine. I gave it to you on the day you married him, and I did not give it as a loan. I gave it as a gift. And my grandson was wrong to call it otherwise, and I am correcting him now, in front of you, so that there can be no misunderstanding. Whatever you decide to do tomorrow, this is yours." I looked at the Duke. He was standing very still by the door, and his face was not the face of a man who had arranged this. It was the face of a man who had just discovered his grandmother had been 3 steps ahead of him for the better part of a year. Third, and this is the part I did not expect, and the part I have thought about every day in the years since. He took me, in the evening, to his library. He had pulled a book from the shelves. It was a small book, leather-bound, and when he opened it, I saw that it was a ledger, not unlike my own. "I kept one too," he said, "from the 41st day. I did not want you to see it. I was ashamed, at first, that I was counting at all. And then I was ashamed of what I was counting. I began counting up, not down. I began counting the number of days you had been in my house, and I had failed to deserve you." He handed it to me. I looked inside. Each page was marked with a date. Some pages were empty. Most had a single line, an observation, a sentence, a record of something I had said or done. Day 41. She did not hide the ledger from me when I asked. She is not cruel. I had assumed she would be. Day 68. She asked the steward about the tenants on the North Farm. She has been visiting them, without telling me. Day 103. She read to my grandmother for 2 hours today. My grandmother has not been read to in 6 years. Day 160. I rode with her. I have not enjoyed a ride in 11 years. I did not tell her that. Day 224. I am in trouble. Day 312. She will leave. I have no right to ask her not to. I have built a year on a foundation I did not understand, and I am running out of foundation. I closed the book. I handed it back. Thank you, I said, for showing me. I did not show it to you to persuade you. I showed it to you because you deserve to know that you were seen. You were seen, Clara, from the 41st day. I simply did not know how to tell you. I know. You will leave tomorrow. I will leave tomorrow. I understand. And he did. That is the thing I want you to understand, above everything else I have told you. He understood. He did not, in the final hour, plead. He did not, as I stepped into the carriage the following afternoon, produce some final argument. He stood on the steps of Ashford with his grandmother beside him, and the housekeeper behind him, and the 3 village children whose cottage had been rebuilt before the first frost. And he watched me go. He wrote to me once, 3 months later, a short letter. He hoped I was well. My sisters had begun to receive their annuities. The cottage at the far edge of the estate was being maintained in my absence by a tenant I might wish to meet one day, if I ever returned to see it. He signed it Edmund. He did not sign it Ashford. I did not write back. I could not, yet. A year of being counted down from is not a year that heals in 3 months. But I wrote to him in the 4th month, and he wrote to me in the 5th. And in the 6th month, I went back to Ashford, as a guest for 2 weeks, at the invitation of the Dowager Duchess, who was dying and who had asked for me. She died with the brass key in her hand. She had taken it from my throat the day before, and she had looked at me, and she had said, "Give it back to him, if you choose. Not as a loan, as a gift, the way I gave it to you." I sat beside her through the night. I thought about it. In the morning, I walked into the Duke's study at the hour he took his coffee. He looked up. He set down his cup. I laid the key on the desk between us. "This is mine," I said. "Your grandmother made that clear. I am giving it to you, not as a bride, not as a wife. As a woman who has decided, after a long and careful accounting, that the year was not the only year available to us." He looked at the key. He looked at me. "What is the number today, Clara?" he said. I smiled for the first time in his presence in my life. "I have stopped counting," I said. We were married the following spring, quietly in the chapel where we had married the first time. There were 12 guests. My brother was home from sea. My sisters wore gowns they had chosen themselves. My mother wept. The Duke's housekeeper, who had known him since he was a boy, said later that she had never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at me when I walked down that aisle. I wore the brass key on a chain of gold, and I have worn it every day since. He thought the year would break me. He was wrong about a great many things, but he was right about one. A year can be enough, if it is the right year, and if, at the end of it, Both people are willing to count something other than the days.